We've split these lectures on the sounds of Spanish and the letters into multiple videos. In this lesson, we're going to focus on those letters and sounds which are more or less the same between English and Spanish. Fortunately, with Spanish, most of the letters are fairly straightforward for an English speaker. There are going to be some slight differences, but we'll talk about them when we get there. But most of the letters you're going to be able to pronounce without a whole lot of work. The Spanish alphabet consists of 27 letters. That's just one more than in English. Here's a list of all the letters that there are in Spanish. You can see the one extra letter is that ñ. This might seem like a lesson that you're going to want to hurry through, but pronunciation is important. Native English speakers, especially Americans, have a well-deserved reputation for having awful accents when we learn foreign languages. And the goal of this course is not to have you pass for a native speaker, but just to make sure that you can pronounce the sounds of Spanish reasonably well. And that'll go a long way in making sure that you're understood and that you're able to understand others. Because when you know how to pronounce the words, you're going to understand them better when other people pronounce them. You're learning to speak the language, and knowing a lot of words and phrases are not going to do you a whole lot of good if you're not pronouncing them in a way that natives can understand. Along with learning the sounds of the letters, we want you to learn the letters' names in Spanish. Sometimes confusingly, the letters are not the same as in English, and especially as a new Spanish learner, it's often helpful to be able to spell a word or your own name, or to ask how a new word you're learning is spelled. For the first Anki deck, if you're using our flashcard deck, we're actually just going to test your knowledge of the names of letters in Spanish. To get us started, when talking about letters in Spanish, I'm going to use the Spanish names for those letters. Rather than just calling it K, I'll say Ka. Spanish pronunciation is fairly consistent around the Spanish-speaking world, but it's not the same everywhere. There are a couple of important sounds that do have some variation from country to country, or even from different regions around a country. We will point some of that out, but don't worry too much about that for now. When you are speaking Spanish with the Spanish speakers that you want to communicate with, listen closely to the way they talk and try to imitate them as much as possible. For this course, we will be relying on Alejandro's Colombian pronunciation. Fortunately, the Colombian accent is a fairly clear and widely understood Latin American accent. So let's get started. So the vowels in Spanish are very easy in that they have the same sound always, unlike in English. In American English, we have the same 5 vowel letters, but we use them to represent 15 different vowel sounds. Fortunately, in Spanish, those 5 vowel letters only represent 5 sounds, and they always represent the same sounds. This does mean, though, that you will have to break some habits from English and focus on pronouncing words consistently. So, for example, when we pronounce the name of Panama in English, even though the word has A's in it, Panama, in American English, we're actually making 3 different sounds for each. Pa, ne, ma. It's a, e, a. And actually, none of those sounds are the way that you would say that word in Spanish. Fortunately, the Spanish A sound does exist in English in words like father, ah. So for contrast, I'm going to say Panama in English, and then Alejandro, you say it the way you would pronounce it in Spanish. So Panama,
Panama,
yeah, Panama versus,
Panama.
yeah. So just you can see the difference in the way I would say it in English. 3 different vowel sounds in Spanish is very consistent, just one sound repeated, Panama. I won't go through this with every vowel, but recognize that you might have a tendency to try to vary vowel sounds in Spanish. Try hard to imitate the sounds you hear. So when Alejandro is going to pronounce a sound, he's going to say the name of the letter, and then he's going to go through each of these words. He'll say the word, give a gap for you to say it. We want you to pronounce it. And then he'll say that same word again so that you can check your pronunciation against the way that he said it. Don't worry about what the words mean at this point. We'll get there. And feel free to come back to this lesson anytime you need a refresher. So with that, go ahead.
La letra A, hablar, hablar. Pan, pan. Cosa, cosa. La letra E, elefante. Elefante. Pegar. Pegar. Adolescente. Adolescente. La letra I. Iglesia. Iglesia. Ardilla. Ardilla. Maíz. Maíz. La letra O. Otoño. Otoño. Codo. Codo. Piano. Piano. La letra U. Uva. Uva. Murmurar. Murmurar. Menú. Menú.
All right. So hopefully you took the time to try to pronounce all of those as you were going through. And I know there's some different sounds in there that maybe you're not familiar with yet, but just focus on those vowels and feel free to come back and repeat this whenever you want to practice getting those vowels exactly right. One thing I'll point out before we pass on is that the letter U, even though I said these vowels always make the same sounds, the letter U sometimes can make a W sound, or it can even be silent in the combination with certain other letters, but we'll talk about that in future lessons. There is also one semivowel in Spanish, and this one is a little tricky just because it can make two different sounds. When it's at the end of the word, it's more like the letter E. When it's at the beginning or the middle of a word, it's more like the letter Y is in English, and it's always used in a combination with another sound. So with that, Alejandro, go ahead.
La letra Y o Y. I. I. Hoy. Hoy. Yegua. Yegua. Ayer. Ayer.
And one other thing I'll point out is you heard Alejandro said it's Y, or you can also call it Y. That's a second name for this letter, which means really a Greek I. It's a couple. Which one is more common, would you say, Y or Y?
We say the same.
Okay.
We say both.
So it could be in Spanish, you may hear both. All right, with that, we'll pass on to the easy letters. These are letters that really, there's not much difference in how you pronounce them in Spanish versus how you'll pronounce them in English. So this is going to be easy, but Alejandro, go ahead.
La letra F. Foca. Foca. Bufanda. Bufanda. Jirafa. Jirafa. La letra L. lotería, lotería, golpe, golpe, animal, animal. La letra M, mañana, mañana, comedia, comedia, síntoma, síntoma. La letra N, nunca, nunca. Encender, encender. Canción, canción. La letra S, sol, sol. Cosecha, cosecha. Crisis, crisis. La letra W, whisky, whisky. Web, web.
One thing to point out with these letters is the letter W and the letter K that we'll see on the next, sorry, the letter W and the letter K are really in Spanish only used with words that are foreign. They're in a way they're not really used in most Spanish words, but when you take in a word like whiskey, web, or as you see here, kilo, bikini, karate, they're kind of international words that have come in that have taken these letters, which aren't really always naturally in Spanish. So these letters are also pretty similar to the way that you'll pronounce them in English, but they all have one difference in common, and that has to do with the amount of air that you pronounce when you say them. In English, especially American English, when you say baby, you may not realize it, but if you hold your hand up in your mouth and you say baby, you can feel kind of air puffing out. It's like linguistically you say it's plosive, or it's aspirated. There's b, d, k, p, t. If you pronounce all those sounds with a hand in front of your face, or if you can't feel it, you hold a piece of paper, p, p, p. You can move that paper. In Spanish, these letters are typically not quite so aspirated. You don't push out so much air, and it can be kind of difficult to do at first because we're so used to it. But try to say these letters while almost thinking about breathing in, or just trying very hard not to. You can sort of hold up a piece of paper or your hand and say bebe versus baby. Bebe, cabeza versus cabeza. Cabeza would be a very strong American accent. Cabeza is more Latin sounding. And you'll see, especially, pay attention closely to how Alejandro does it. Don't just think, oh, I know what B and D sounds like, because they are different sounds. They're close, but they're a little different. With that, Alejandro, take it away.
La letra B, bebé, bebé. Cabeza, cabeza. Celebrar, celebrar. La letra D, desayuno, desayuno, madera, madera, felicidad, felicidad. La letra K, kilo, kilo, bikini, bikini, karate, karate. La letra P, palabra, palabra. Capítulo, capítulo. Equipo, equipo. La letra T, tocar, tocar. Intentar, intentar. Permitir, permitir.
With that, we've gone through 17 of the 27 letters in the Spanish alphabet. So we've done more than half, but the next 10 are more difficult. We're going to have to spend a little time. Some of these are just not pronounced in the way you'd expect. They're a little less consistent, and some of them you're really going to have to learn some new sounds that you don't necessarily pronounce in English, especially the jota. But nothing too hard, right? It's all doable. So with that, I think we'll probably have one or maybe two more lessons on the alphabet before we move on to other topics. Thank you.